Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to this set of webinars that we're starting for the month of July, which hope to kind of frame where we have seen many of the trends and the disruptions that have changed the face of Latin America and the Caribbean in the recent years, and how to better understand not only what we have learned over the past few years, but more importantly, all of the challenges that we have ahead of us. And we're starting the series with one of the most serious and challenging issues of our time, and that's sustainability and climate change. I remember that resilience and sustainability and climate change were things that few people talked about 15 years ago. And I recall that with the generous support of the general government, we started what was then called our Sustainable Energy and Climate Change Initiative. And this was, in the early 2005, where sustainability was sometimes perceived as an agenda that was basically an agenda of developed countries and many of the non-regional members of our institution. But climate change, as we have all seen, has been knocking on our doors for some time. And unlike COVID, which surprised the world, climate change is something that we know is there, and humanity as a whole has really to step up and do more. And things have been changing. And certainly some of the areas that we were focused at the beginning were perhaps the more easier things around energy efficiency and the more difficult things around adaptation, which certainly, as I'm sure that we're privileged today to have a great friend, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who in those days when I came to the bank was a star finance minister under then Prime Minister Owen Arthur. But she has really taken on this, and the issues of adaptation could not be better seen than in Caribbean countries. And what we'll see today then is kind of what the chance to hear directly from Prime Minister Mottley, who is by far one of the best regional leaders I've had the chance of meeting, but equally with Juan Pablo Bonilla, who is our manager of the Climate Change and Sustainable Development sector here at the bank. It's a cross-sector kind of effort that we have been doing, and he's been doing a fantastic job. So I'd like to begin first by having Juan Pablo tell us just how much has happened over the last 15 years. And then we'll have an opportunity to hear from Prime Minister Mottley to tell us how she thinks the years ahead and the focus that we should have as a region and certainly as a bank. So with that, over to you, Juan Pablo.
Presidente, muchas gracias, muy buenas tardes. Gracias por invitarme a este conversatorio. Prime Minister, it's a pleasure and honor as always having you with us. And by the way, thank you and your government for the opportunity for our team to support in all the efforts of your sustainability program, that is your program. And I will just switch back to Spanish to start this conversation, President. Como se mencionó, el presidente habló del cambio que hemos tenido en estos 15 años y quiero iniciar esta conversación resaltando que muchos de los logros que se han tenido no son de este departamento, es un esfuerzo colectivo de muchas de las áreas del banco y que se han podido llevar a cabo no solo por el gran apoyo que hemos tenido del presidente, de los vicepresidentes del banco, sino de nuestro directorio durante estos 15 años y de nuestros gobernadores que nos han acompañado en este proceso. Y sin duda, como mencionaba el presidente Moreno, ha habido una gran transformación en los ámbitos del cambio climático y la sostenibilidad. Es otro mundo, presidente, diría yo literalmente. Otro mundo porque los impactos del cambio climático y la falta de sostenibilidad ambiental son cada vez más presentes en nuestras vidas. Huracanes, inundaciones, sequías, contaminación ambiental local, del aire, del agua, del mal manejo de nuestros residuos sólidos y tóxicos, migración ambiental debido a impactos también que se están generando, inclusive plagas y enfermedades que se están dando por el mal manejo de nuestra biodiversidad. Pero al mismo tiempo es otro mundo porque nunca tuvimos tantos instrumentos, conocimiento, mejor entendimiento, desarrollo tecnológico a nuestro alcance. Nunca tantas soluciones probadas al servicio del desarrollo sostenible y nunca antes un reconocimiento tan transversal de que asegurar la sostenibilidad y la resiliencia es una prioridad local, pero al mismo tiempo global para el bienestar de nuestras sociedades. ¿Cómo hemos llegado a donde estamos hoy en estos 15 años? Es algo bastante complejo de explicar en solo una conversación, pero yo lo resumiría en 3 cambios de paradigma. El primero que quiero destacar ha sido la transición hacia un abordaje integral y territorial de la sostenibilidad. Un abordaje que integra múltiples sectores y considera la interacción entre los sectores y la comunidad en el espacio físico, tanto urbano como rural. Esto ha dejado de ser una agenda que los ministerios de medio ambiente empezaron a ver después de la cumbre del 1992, la cumbre de la Tierra, a ser una prioridad de Estado para abordarlo de esta manera, integral entre los sectores y territorial, viendo la interacción entre las ciudades y nuestro desarrollo rural. Antes analizábamos el desarrollo rural a través de sus principales actividades económicas, agrícolas, por ejemplo. Hoy hay que evaluarlo en su conjunto con las actividades socioeconómicas y su relación con el mosaico de paisajes locales. A los que no son ambientalistas, esto significa la importancia de los servicios de los ecosistemas para la productividad y la eficiencia, tanto en áreas rurales como en nuestras ciudades. Antes el turismo lo veíamos simplemente como un generador de divisas o de crecimiento económico. Hoy tenemos que ver el turismo como un área pensando en el tejido empresarial, la inclusión social, cómo se distribuyen los beneficios en la comunidad local y sobre todo, cómo la resiliencia y la sostenibilidad hacen parte del desarrollo turístico. Lo vemos, esta transformación de paradigma más acentuada en la región, en nuestras ciudades. América Latina y el Caribe tiene cerca del 85% de nuestra población en las ciudades, pero ya no basta con enfocar el desarrollo urbano en torno a la función económica, sino las sinergias generadas por las ciudades se sustentan cuando los espacios urbanos priorizan las personas y sus interacciones. El BID había trabajado mucho en el tema de desarrollo urbano, en programas de mejoramiento de barrios, en políticas de hábitat y vivienda. Fuimos gestores como banco con muchos gobiernos de la región en esto, pero se da esta confluencia con la sostenibilidad en ciudades cuando en el año 2011 se genera la iniciativa de ciudades emergentes y sostenibles y articulamos el desarrollo urbano con la sostenibilidad ambiental, con la sostenibilidad social y la sostenibilidad financiera y económica en nuestras ciudades. Durante este tiempo hemos no solo seguido apoyando programas de mejoramiento de barrios a la gente más vulnerable en nuestras ciudades, hasta apoyar reformas nacionales de leyes de ordenamiento territorial, zoning and planning, que tiene que ser de nuevo uno de los ejes de la sostenibilidad, pero al mismo tiempo viendo la importancia de la vivienda como un motor de desarrollo, la vivienda sostenible, y al mismo tiempo la gobernanza metropolitana como eje para poder pensar en proyectos integrales de transporte sostenible, de saneamiento de cuencas, de manejo de residuos sólidos, e inclusive ahora con el COVID, como muchas ciudades han actuado colectivamente para poder enfrentar la pandemia. Segundo paradigma, presidente, y cierro el tema de ciudades. Hoy en día, vía la red de ciudades y nuestro laboratorio, lo que arrancó como una iniciativa hoy significa el apoyo a más de 150 ciudades de América Latina y el Caribe. Segundo paradigma, después del tema territorial, urbano y rural, ha sido la transformación con respecto a la inmensa riqueza natural de la región. Por eso América Latina y el Caribe son denominados un superpoder de la biodiversidad, ya que tenemos cerca del 40% de la biodiversidad del mundo. Durante los últimos 15 años hemos visto una transición de un manejo de recursos naturales hacia una gestión de capital natural. El BID en el 2005 integró en un grupo lo que era medio ambiente, desarrollo rural, turismo y desastres, para empezar a buscar esa convergencia de cómo la biodiversidad y el capital natural era necesario para la agricultura, para el turismo, para la adaptación a los desastres naturales. Pero nos tomó tiempo ir generando esa integración hasta que cerca del año 2011 también creamos el programa de biodiversidad y servicios ecosistémicos para empezar a hacer el vínculo de la biodiversidad no solo con el sector privado y con la bioeconomía para generar empleo, con la valorización de los servicios ecosistémicos en las cuentas nacionales y con el apoyo a jóvenes profesionales de la región para pensar, innovar y crear negocios con el uso sostenible de la biodiversidad. Por ello, la evolución de lo que era ese programa de biodiversidad resulta en el último año y medio en lo que es nuestro capital natural, el laboratorio de capital natural y biodiversidad, que se convierte en el eje para transversalizar la biodiversidad en los sectores del banco, apoyar a nuestros países en ese mismo propósito y sobre todo ser el eje de innovación financiera para pensar distinto y poder generar esquemas de apoyo al capital natural. Este ha sido un proyecto muy lindo que hemos desarrollado con BidLab, con BidInvest, el grupo Bid completo y con el apoyo muy importante de diferentes donantes como Francia y Reino Unido. Y hablando de instrumentos financieros, tenemos que, por supuesto, hablar de los bonos verdes, que es algo, presidente, que hace 15 años creo que nadie se imaginaba. Entre el 2014 y el 2019 se emitieron bonos verdes por cerca de 12.600 millones de dólares en América Latina y el Caribe. Y es un sector que sigue creciendo. Estamos muy orgullosos de contribuir con esto, con nuestra facilidad de la Green Finance Facility y a fortalecer los marcos con la plataforma de transparencia de bonos verdes, que también ha sido un proyecto entre el BID y BidInvest. Y estamos en este momento apoyando a cerca de 5 países para estructurar bonos soberanos y subsoberanos. A propósito de esto, ya que tenemos a la primera ministra, va a ser fundamental hacia futuro pensar en bonos azules, en blue bonds y en bonos de resiliencia como parte de la estructuración financiera y el apoyo para nuestros países. Tercer paradigma, presidente, y último, yo diría que es el de cambio climático y desastres naturales. Y a manera de anécdota, viendo historia del banco, hace 60 años, uno de los primeros créditos que hicimos fue recuperación por desastre. Hace 60 años se rehabilitó todo el servicio de agua en Arequipa después de 2 terremotos. ¿Y por qué traigo este ejemplo? Porque más allá de pensar en la atención a desastres, es muy importante pensar en la prevención de los desastres naturales. En el año 2007 empezamos toda nuestra estrategia para apoyo en la prevención a los desastres naturales y al mismo tiempo, como usted lo mencionó, se crea el Fondo SECI y la Iniciativa de Energía Sostenible y Cambio Climático para impulsar la mitigación y adaptación en el banco. Y al mismo tiempo, internamente, empezamos un esfuerzo muy importante para que todas nuestras oficinas fueran cero emisiones netas en carbono. Hemos evolucionado desde ese inicio. Hoy en día ya se cuentan con unos marcos internacionales mucho más sólidos, con los SDGs o ODS, el Acuerdo de París, el marco de Sendai para prevención de desastres, pero la evolución la hemos visto internamente dentro del banco. Pensar hace 15 años en grandes proyectos de energía renovable, de transporte sostenible, de vivienda sostenible, era muy complejo. Hoy en día hace parte de nuestra agenda con los países y sobre todo nos ha ayudado a consolidar una agenda de infraestructura sostenible. Fuimos el primer MDB con un marco de infraestructura sostenible que hoy posiciona esto como uno de los principales ejes de crecimiento, generación de empleo y recuperación para la región. Pero a mí me gustaría, presidente, mencionar como parte de esta conversión que parte de esta transformación del tema de desastres y cambio climático la estamos viendo en nuestras calles de la región, en válidas protestas a tiempo en juntas directivas. Los riesgos del cambio climático hoy son señalados con gran urgencia por adolescentes como mis 2 hijos, pero al mismo tiempo son analizados por bancos centrales, debatidos por ministros de economía, por prime ministers, por presidentes y por los principales CEOs de muchos bancos de inversión al mismo tiempo que el sistema financiero. En el 2013 lanzamos una herramienta para apoyar la prevención de desastres, lo hemos ya hecho en 26 países para analizar los marcos de gobernanza y políticas y al mismo tiempo hemos establecido las líneas de contingencia que ya la tenemos en todos los países del Caribe, pero están en 14 países de la región que suman cerca de 3.000 millones de dólares para ese equilibrio entre la prevención y marcos de gobernanza con la atención a los desastres. Sin embargo, tenemos que hacer muchos más esfuerzos. Estamos empezando a trabajar los primeros cat bonds para la región, pero sin duda el trabajo de nuevos instrumentos financieros, de seguros y sobre todo de esto de una manera regional va a ser fundamental para la región y el acompañamiento del Grupo BID en los próximos años. Al inicio del 2016, nuestros gobernadores se comprometieron con un aumento sustancial del financiamiento climático. Con este mandato elaboramos un riguroso plan de acción. Empezamos la integración sistemática de mitigación, adaptación y resiliencia en nuestros proyectos. Lanzamos la plataforma NDC Invest y el acelerador para apoyar a que los compromisos de los NDCs fueran acciones concretas. Y en 4 años duplicamos nuestro financiamiento climático, contribuyendo 15.600 millones de dólares de recursos del Grupo BID en los 26 países de nuestra región. Adicional a estos recursos, hemos contado siempre con el apoyo generoso y estratégico de nuestros países no regionales. Sin sus donaciones, cooperaciones técnicas y cofinanciación, no hubiera sido posible llegar a esta meta. Termino, presidente, mostrando cómo el 2019 y el 2020 reforzaron la importancia de continuar combatiendo la desigualdad, continuar fortaleciendo la prevención, la resiliencia y la sostenibilidad socioambiental. Creo que el COVID nos ha hecho cada día reflexionar más de cómo el crecimiento y la generación de empleo hacia futuro en nuestra región tiene que pasar, ir de la mano de crear una sociedad mucho más resiliente en lo ambiental, lo social y lo económico. En pocos meses tendremos un marco fortalecido de salvaguardas ambientales y sociales y sabemos que la sostenibilidad socioambiental será clave para el crecimiento y la generación de empleo en la región más rica en capital natural del mundo. Sabemos que aún tenemos mucho camino por recorrer. Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Juan Pablo. You basically gave a great overview of what today is clearly the DNA and the center of all the development agenda for everybody. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Prime Minister Mia Mottley, whose leadership in Barbados, where she's made sustainability a cross-cutting dimension, not only of its national strategy to become a more resilient and inclusive country. But before talking about, both Barbados and the Caribbean, I'd like to hear from you, Prime Minister, some of your reactions to what Juan Pablo just mentioned. And how do you think public perceptions and political priorities on these issues have shifted over the last 15 years, and how do you see them moving forward?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to apologize and say to you, Luis Alberto, you sounded like a Bajan calling my name. So I know you're now speaking English with a Barbadian accent. We'll complete the course for you later. On the issue of what Juan Pablo has said and on what you've raised with the whole question of public perceptions and political priorities, look, I'm happy that climate change is no longer perceived as a fringe issue. I think that over the course of the last few years, we've seen more and more people bring the issue of climate change mainstream. And certainly for us, it has been heartening that even those countries that have refused to treat to it mainstream as a matter of governmental policy, we've seen their populations, or in some instances, their local governments or state governments, accept that this is our reality and that really and truly we are losing time on an issue that is already on our doorsteps. And I think that we don't need to repeat what our population feels and knows. The coastal communities throughout the entire Caribbean, throughout the Gulf of Mexico, understand about sargassum weed. In fact, it's perhaps the thing that is least spoken about in the climate crisis, but it is a thing that impacts on the average person who operates a business on a coastal community or lives in a coastal community more than any other. In our own country, the groundwater crisis has now become so pervasive that almost 40% of our parishes have intermittent access to water, largely because the reservoirs that would normally have 17 feet of underground water, my minister took the press into one of the reservoirs last week, and I can send you the photographs that Juan Carlos can share with you from Barbados. And you will see that the water literally is just below waist level. So how do you move from 17 feet of water to 3-4 feet of water? Now I give these examples to be able to show why, in our view, this issue is no longer a fringe issue, but it is being held up, regrettably, by our failure to appreciate the virtue of multilateral instruments and multilateral action with respect to how we fight off an issue that is bigger than all of us in the global community. And I pray that we are going to be able to build on that growing public awareness. You know, the young people of the world are really, really stepping up to the plate in ways that we've never anticipated. And you know, you're accustomed hearing people complain about what they think and how they behave and all of that. But they have become, in a very real sense, the conscience of the world. And they have said to the world, we are the ones who stand to be affected when coastal communities can no longer exist, or when hurricanes decimate an entire country. So these are the things that matter to us. And I pray that their activism will not simply be on social media or simply be on protests in the street, where it may even be cool to protest sometimes, but that it carries itself into the influence on policy, which at the end of the day is the only meaningful. The power of the pen right now is more powerful than any amount of money that anybody can give us. And I speak as a Caribbean person because I know the consequences of the absence of that fiscal space and the absence of that policy space. That's not only fiscal, it's also policy space with respect to a lot of what we need to do. Now, on our own end, what do I believe? I'm not sure that we are transitioning enough of our domestic policies as individual countries sufficiently to match what we're calling for internationally. And I believe fair is fair. And I think that we need to do, just as we've done with COVID, where we came together and we had common protocols that allowed us to be able to deal with the public health emergency. I think that perhaps on the issue of vulnerability and resilience and all of the other things that are necessary for us to withstand the climate crisis, I think that there's more that we can probably do at the domestic level. But there are some things that are beyond us, like the insurance issue and others that we've spoken about. And of course, the big issue is, at what level does the world accept that it has to pull back? Is it at 1 degree? Is it at 1.5? It definitely can't be at 2. And even 1.5 compromises too many of us.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Mottley. And as you mentioned, both COVID and climate change related issues are touching basically the younger generations, because we're all writing and making decisions on a world that they're going to have to deal with higher debt and all the consequences of COVID, but more importantly on what happens to our world. And in this sense, you were talking about resiliency. And I know this is a word we seldom used, 10, 15 years ago, but that's something you talk a lot about, like you just did. What does resiliency mean to you? And how have you begun to integrate the notion of resiliency across everything that you're doing in Barbados?
I think that all of us know that there's scientific definitions to resilience or resiliency that speak to one's ability to have a good outcome following a negative intervening event. And for some, it's simply the ability to withstand or to be able to recover quickly. But for us, resiliency has to imply choice. And what does that mean? Choice means redundancy. And when you live on an island that's 166 square miles, or a series of islands that are literally very small, you don't have the luxury of abandoning one area and moving to another area. And perhaps this is one of the major discussions that we've tried to reinforce over the years, that absence of choice is what makes us face not just simply a calamitous event, but the reality of a failed state. And that is what I believe is not necessarily being captured when we start to have the other part of the discussion. And I'm not sure how palatable it is politically for our development partners, but how do you talk about vulnerability for 30 years and not have an appropriate metric to be able to capture it? And the opposite of vulnerability is ultimately resilience. So that I'm happy that the conversation is taking place on resilience, but at the same time, it makes no sense if we try to compartmentalize it and take away from us the reality of the options that we need to have in order to be able to plan out our affairs. And secondly, the absence of metrics that allow us to access both technical assistance and concessional funding on the basis of our vulnerability, rather than the historic metrics of per capita income. And I mean, Luis Alberto, how often have we've been in too many sessions now where we've had this discussion. And Einstein says that the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. And I know that regrettably you're leaving us, and I feel that we have to find a way to cause you to be a champion in arms with us on this issue, because the window and the space is narrowing at such a rapid rate that unless we have credible people who understand the issues and who can help push the development agenda on these particular issues, I regret that we may be collateral damage as persons determine what is the real meaning of resilience and what does vulnerability really mean for others. And you know what's so special? Hurricanes hit almost every year. Who's the one country that a hurricane hits virtually every year?
Okay.
It's not
Are
Barbados.
always
It's not
Caribbean
Bahamas.
countries, unfortunately,
It's
and we're
Caribbean
exactly in
countries.
that season.
But guess who it hits?
It's the
United
poorest.
States of America, the USA. It's just a question of which state. So is it going to be Texas? Is it going to be Louisiana? Is it going to be Florida? Is it going to be Georgia, etc.? And I think that we may have to change the metrics of our conversation to not just deal with the federal governments, but also to begin to see where the opportunities for sharing, cooperation, policy flexibility, etc., is at the level of states and cities as we go forward. And in fact, those are the ones who have been responding positively to the climate crisis discussion, because they feel it.
No question, and that begs the question, of course, that you've always raised and that we've begun to do some work on, which is, how do you create an insurance mechanism that adds a set of players, including those states that you mentioned in the US? And certainly insurance always goes down when the amount of risk that you include is larger, and therefore you can begin not only have insurance against natural disasters, but equally against droughts or fires. And, it's been proven that the minute that you grow the amount of risk that you're covering, the consequence that you have is much better than just an island state trying to get insurance for itself. And so we've been working on that. Let me take you over to...
But I ask you something though, Luis Alberto, why don't we propose that yourself, President Clinton, and we will find a person from the Caribbean, that we need a blue ribbon commission that deals with this issue of insurance for Central and Latin America, the coastal states of the United States of America, and the countries of the Caribbean. Because the truth is that, especially in the absence of the natural disaster clauses, which we have in our bonds now, I wish we had pandemic clauses too, but the natural disaster clauses will, over a 2-year period, if a storm hit us today, will create 17% of GDP in terms of fiscal space for us automatically in a 2-year period. Now, that will help significantly, but it's not going to help the whole way. And hence how the insurance industry deals with it and the premiums that it has and that it needs to support it in between becomes a critical conversation. And I'd like to suggest that yourself, President Clinton, who shared a great deal of passion on this issue, and then we find someone that we can nominate from the region, one of our former prime ministers or ministers of finance, to work with you all. Because if we don't find an answer, you're going to be having this discussion 5-10 years from now, sorry.
I'm happy you take the lead, Prime Minister. I'm going to be unemployed starting in your birthday, October 1st. So I'm happy,
that's
to work on this. I have a big passion for this issue.
No, you are the person. Believe you me.
Thank you. Talk to us a little bit about your Roof to Reef program that you established in Barbados, which is one of your answers to resiliency.
Yeah, we recognize that we could continue to do small projects here and there, but we felt that we needed to have an overarching project that is generational and that allows us to get the population to understand how everything hangs together. So how we build houses, how we deal with our water supply, how we deal with our energy, how we deal with the protection of our coral reefs, how we deal with the runoff from sewage or the runoff from agriculture. All of these things hang together. And part of the reality is that we have been, as you know, building for decades without reference to what would be the consequences. And Barbados is particularly bad because we really, have not been hit by a hurricane since 1955, Hurricane Janet. It therefore means that there is a complacency that had set in over the decades with respect to the types of construction And what we're trying to do is to both influence future construction as well as to strengthen the roofs of existing properties, because our greatest fear is that if we are hit even by a Category 2 hurricane, we will have significant damage to our housing stock. In addition to that, Barbados is one of the 30 most water scarce countries in the world. And to that extent, therefore, how we treat to the capturing of water, the harvesting of water, to desalination, to a whole range of other things to be able to augment our water supply while dealing with the very real problem that our pipes and distribution system was put down more than a century ago, and in many instances needs complete replacement, which is likely to cost significant sums of money, but over $2.5 billion I'm told over a 20-year period. So you have a problem with augmentation and distribution. And we're trying, therefore, to be able to deal with that in a way that makes sense because of the consequences to the groundwater crisis. We used to have an abundance of groundwater that's just moving. Similarly, if you have to go to desalination, the cost of electricity becomes an issue. And therefore, the whole question of energy and the whole question of the fact that how do we rely on the patrimony that we have to produce electricity rather than fossil fuels, which in any way has a negative impact on our foreign exchange and balance of payment situation. And finally, how do we deal with the fact, when I was a child, I walked all through the West Coast and the reefs were there. We saw cobblers, we saw sea eggs, we saw all kinds of living organisms that regrettably my nieces don't see today when they walk the same beaches. And that's largely been because of the killing of the reefs. So how do we pay forward? By rebuilding the reefs and by ensuring that we clean up the water quality around the reefs to halt the destruction, but also through using creative ways of coral harvesting and regeneration technologies on a wide scale that we come to do better. I want to salute the Inter-American Development Bank, because across successive governments, were it not for the Inter-American Development Bank, Barbados's coastal framework would not be what it is today. You have spent more money on us, which we're paying back, yes, but believing in us with respect to treating to this as a national priority. And then when you add to that the vulnerability assessment that you have given us over the course of the last few years, we are in a far better position to deal with this. All we've said is from roofs to reefs. Let us capture it, because all of these things are affected by the bad practices that we have that do not put us in a resilient position to be able to deal with the climate crisis. And we are conscious that no single institution, nor no single 5-year period in government will help us. This is a generational approach to be able to reboot the country and to set it on a sustainable path such that 20 years from now, 15 years from now, people can say, if it had not been for these actions, the consequences would have been far, far worse.
Prime Minister, you've done a fantastic job in dealing with the COVID crisis. And certainly what we all see throughout by the just sheer nature of the lockdowns that we've been in is that all of a sudden nature comes to us in so many different ways, from birds in the morning to the whole quality of what you see in the oceans. How do you see the sustainability agenda being impacted by COVID? But more importantly, can we not make this a win-win going forward? And if so, what areas do you think we should be concentrating on to look forward as a result of this amazing crisis that is equally an opportunity as is often reminded to us by many?
Well, the one good thing, let's start first. There's a renewed respect for science. Prior to COVID, people doubted the validity of science and science to inform policy makers. Secondly, that we have now the opportunity, as you say, to reset and rebuild. And you know, it's scarce resources all over. And governments have had to step in and to provide multiples of what they would otherwise provide to be able to keep businesses alive and to keep the vulnerable safe. And we have to ask ourselves the question, is every dollar given equal? Can you say that you should be now financing car companies that are still building combustible engines at this stage in time Or do we start to reduce the reliance by saying, look, we're either not giving you or we're giving you half of what we would otherwise have given you as an incentive for you to be able to turn to different mechanisms in order to power the vehicle? Can we say that we should truly be given fossil fuel subsidies any part of the world? Or should we not be looking at being able to take some of those subsidies and to put to subsidize renewable energy? Because in some instances, the cost of renewable energy is still not exactly where some countries may need it to be in terms of its effectiveness and its economic multiplier effect, given the fact that, especially for small states, the numbers and the import costs and the various other costs associated with it is a little higher than we would like. Can we say that we are prepared now to take developmental decisions that allow us to have as planning gains? If you want to build properties in coastal communities, are you going to have a planning gain attached to it that says you need to take care of the coral reefs and to rebuild the coral reefs in front of that hotel or in front of that house, especially if it is a major investment that you're making within the region? So I give some of those examples to show you how I think that we can use the power of the pen again, as well as the allocation of much needed resources to be able to stabilize enterprises as we go forward, to be able to move to the next level. 100 years ago, there was a company in Barbados called Goddard's Ice Company. It didn't make it even to the 1970s because electricity became literally available across the majority of the country in the 60s, 50s, 60s. And as a result, nobody needed an ice company anymore. And the world is replete with examples where we've literally moved away from outdated and outmoded technology. If we can do that for technologies, why can't we do it in a way that allows us to save the earth and to protect the spaces for our children and grandchildren?
Prime Minister, one of the areas that we're just precisely talking about is the private sector and how they can address better sustainability issues. I know you're somebody that are always in contact with your people. You've been doing a lot of things in the way of water and how to save water. But this is also an opportunity for employment generation. How do you see the role of the private sector? And you see it very well now, you know, especially with the challenges that you have on tourism, how private sector companies are trying to rethink what they're doing while keeping jobs and at the same time managing issues of sustainability.
Couple of things. I mean, I don't think that there's been any more destabilizing short-term, or I shouldn't say short-term, destabilizing sudden intervention that has caused this kind of disruption in modern history. And one of the things that we've tried to do is to look at projects that tick a number of categories. So we want to be a good corporate citizen, good country, sorry. We want our companies to be good corporate citizens, but it takes cash to care. And unless, therefore, there is revenue coming in, tourism establishments and those dependent on tourism have dropped to zero revenue, but they still have expenses. So how do we try to create opportunities for them while creating demand still in the society? And the demand in the society comes, in our view, from being able to expand the number of capital projects, but building back better, as we just discussed, rather than just projects for the sake of having projects. So the water, without a doubt, we're putting in new reservoirs, we're putting in new pumping stations, we're putting in new pipe. We are looking at temporary desal facilities until the permanent ones are available. At the same time, we are looking at a massive road construction program. The IDB has contributed, there's an existing loan with that. Yesterday, the Latin American Development Bank approved another $100 million for us with respect to our road program. All of these things allow us to build back better. And in some instances, we need to be able to be more resilient. How can we move our overhead electricity cables underground in some instances, recognizing that if a hurricane comes, look at Dominica, look at the Bahamas. In some instances, 1 year later, there's no electricity to certain communities because everything is overhead. Now, Florida was able to build back these huge concrete poles instead of relying on the aluminum poles that will fall down quickly. And therefore, they've been able to secure between that and some underground work, the resilience with respect to their access to power. We believe that the opportunities for jobs will flow naturally from doing the right thing with respect to preparing ourselves for a more resilient future. And as we do that, and I use this opportunity because I feel that I need to, that only last week I announced, for example, a 12-month Barbados welcome stamp, because we recognize that short-term tourists will be the issue. But if we can have persons who want to come here for a month, 3 months, up to a year, and work from here, and you know your invitation is there, and if we can have that, then it allows us to be able to equate those persons to offset some of the loss of revenue that we're experiencing as a result of COVID and the shutdown of the tourism sector. And we feel that we're not looking for a lot. The other thing that we've discovered is that our population numbers are down. So that when you take all of these things, we need a far more open approach, but at the same time, one that will allow us to rebuild and to cause jobs to be created. And we're best to rebuild through digitization, where the bank is helping us now with our records, and through capital projects that help us to offset and to be more resilient the climate to the climate crisis.
Minister, let's for a minute talk. You equally now are chairing the whole CARICOM group. And I still remember something that I think touched a lot of people when we were in a G20 meeting, when then in Buenos Aires, when Prime Minister Holness basically said, look, I've been trying to rebalance my economy, bring down debt. One hurricane can erase all of those efforts that we have done. How are you thinking Caribbean-wide of the kinds of things that I think not only the IDB, but the world as a whole should be thinking? You mentioned some of them just now on what you were saying earlier, but when you think about kind of that public set of public goods that need to be developed in a more cohesive way, in the sense of the same kind of practices, how are you thinking about that? And what are the salient issues that you see coming across all of the Caribbean countries?
I say all the time, Mr. President, that, and I tell my ministers this all the time, structure follows function. But before we get to function, let's settle mission. And the bottom line is that the first thing that the global community and the hemispheric institutions have to do is to determine what you're trying to achieve. I'm not so sure that we're on the same page. I know that you are and a number of others are, but if we were on the same page, what we would also be doing is recognizing that the inherent vulnerability of this region to, one, climate, two, the pandemic as we now see it, three, because of lack of size, to high debt and low growth, and at the same time, the whole question of the other social ramifications, violence, etc., as a public health disorder. When you start to look at all of those things, I'm asking myself over and over, and I've started to have a limited conversation with you. I see it with respect to Latin America. I see it with respect to Africa. Should we not be ensuring that both the cost and the tenor of debt match the vulnerability? We say it instinctively, but we don't do it. We have countries, and I'm grateful that representatives of the United States government have encouraged us now to go forward for exceptional access in the context of COVID-19. But besides COVID-19, you and I just are here talking about the climate crisis. So we can borrow for COVID-19 now from the World Bank, but not for the climate crisis. And yet we are the first landfall that the hurricanes may pass before they get to the last landfall to the US mainland, which is the Bahamas. So between BAR and BAH, which is 1 week apart, we literally ring fence what potentially can happen through a storm. But yet neither of the two of us are entitled to borrow for climate crisis issues. Now, I know that the bank has been committed, and I want to salute the bank, that you will take 30% of what you are doing in your operational approvals and relate it to climate financing. I want to urge you as you do that, that it not only be for adaptation, not only be for mitigation, but it rather be for adaptation and resilience. But even when the bank does that, unless there is a hemispheric or global compact that looks at how we treat to stabilizing these vulnerable nations, or the vulnerabilities of these nations, if that makes it sound more politically palatable, we will not have gotten where we need to get. I want to also recommend the natural disaster clauses, not because I'm trying to give others and allow others to benefit from what we have. I am a lawyer, and contracts either unravel in an orderly way or a disorderly way. Why would you want a disorderly unraveling of contractual obligations? And is that not used by the same financiers to increase the cost of capital as an uncharacteristic risk that we cannot appropriately define, but that we can quantify? I mean, this is the nonsense that we are now trying to fight. And I hope and pray, I really do, that separate from the work that I feel that you need to lead us to with insurance, which is more complex, because you're dealing now with investments and you're dealing with rates of return and premium and all kinds of things. But at the very least, if we can put together instruments that say, let us for the first time, and that's what the whole reparations discussion is being caught up with, you know, that at the point of independence, these countries were not given a compact or any kind of development framework other than these institutions may be there. Take a project here, take a project there, take a project there. But you've never caught up, you've never got to stand up properly as a man or a woman to be able to start the process of rebuilding. And I feel strongly that climate crisis, because of its inherent ability to literally create a failed state overnight, ought to be at the front line, along with the pandemic, in showing us why we need to finally address these vulnerabilities, put appropriate instruments in place, and that by doing so, we will have settled the mission. We would then look and see what is our function in terms of being able to put these things in place. And as a result, is there a need for other reforms and other structures? Because I don't only believe that it is an international issue. I feel, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, that there are some domestic policy initiatives that we must take that are not fiscal, but that go ourselves to reducing the vulnerability. And the tool that you helped us develop reinforces the need for those kinds of domestic policy initiatives to be put in place to reduce our vulnerability.
Thank you for that question. I can't help but ask you something that I'm sure, knowing you, you've given a lot of thought, given that it's such a central part of your economies and that of the rest of the Caribbean is tourism. One of the things that you have been developing is a lot of ecotourism, a lot of destinations, not just for a couple, but for a family, on things like fishing, on scuba, and the rest of it, which are all, amiable to the environment. How do you see tourism developing? What we certainly know is, independent of the mobility that we get, people are going to travel less and they're going to travel closer to home. What is the pitch and the ideas that you are thinking about of getting people back to Barbados? You historically have had, in the case of Barbados, you correct me, over half of your tourists coming from Europe. It's very likely that many can now come, I'm sure, from South America, from Central America, because we're all going to be looking at closer destinations. How are you seeing that? And what are the kinds of things you're thinking of putting in place such that we can all go back to Barbados and spend time? You don't have to convince me, but for those who are listening to you.
You know, I'm a student of history, and I must carry us back. Barbados' earliest foray with tourism wasn't just with dealing with the English metropole. It was, in fact, in dealing with Central and Latin America. You know, it was the presence of air travel that literally removed us from our central hub, being a central hub, connecting our countries together. I can go to Venezuela now. I can go to Brazil now. I can go to Nicaragua now. I can go to Costa Rica now. I can go to Cartagena. I can go to all of these countries or cities and show you descendants of Barbados or descendants of other Caribbean territories. And why? Because we moved with each other. Now, we've allowed language to be a block, obstacle to what we do. But yet, last week I did a summit with you, or week before, with the Prime Minister of Spain. And I was the only non-Spanish speaking person on that entire summit with the heads from Latin America and other places, Central America. I had no translation. Today, I listened to Juan Pablo on Zoom in English as Juan Pablo spoke in Spanish. The only thing that wasn't in English, and I had to rely on my school Spanish, was the presentations on the screen. I say all of this to make the point that I do believe that the sensitivity of the younger generations to want, first and foremost, to save the world means that they are more likely to want to look closer afield. The ones who want to go further, they will find, and I have no doubt that the world is going to find eco-friendly ways of travel. That's just who we are as human beings. We have people who still want to reach Mars and who still want to reach Pluto and who want to reach beyond the moon. That's just who human beings are. We want to acquire knowledge and use it and move forward. But in the interim, do we know enough about each other? I can tell you that 50, 60, 70 years ago we did, but we don't know. And you know, it's one of the reasons why I've argued for a number of years now that if the Organization of American States had one duty and one duty alone, you know what it should be? To allow every person from Alaska to Chile to be able to learn to speak English, Spanish, and Portuguese. We did nothing else in the next decade. Can you imagine what kind of continent, what kind of hemispheric reality we could have? And in doing that, the opportunities for working, I have doctors, students who live here who go to Cuba and study medicine in Spanish, having never spoken Spanish before they left Barbados. So I believe that those opportunities are there. I believe that the cultural commonalities are there. I go into Bahia and I see something that looks exactly like sugar cake in Barbados. Okay, I go to Cartagena and I feel as though I'm at home as I am in the Caribbean. So I hope that we redefine tourism and to recognize also that tourism is not only recreational tourism. There's tourism from educational tourism, there's medical tourism, there's ecotourism, there's business tourism, because more and more people will want to do business once we start to know each other. And that is why, and there's also long stay tourism. That's why we've launched this 12-month Barbados Welcome Stamp, because we recognize that if you're raising a family, and I'm speaking, my native language is English, I may want to carry my family to a Spanish-speaking country for a year or two, so that my kids are now given the best platform that they can be given and to be exposed to different cultures. So I think that there are a number of things that we can do to retweak it, but at the same time, I do believe that the inventors and the creative people of the global community will find mechanisms that will allow us to travel long distances without necessarily affecting the global atmosphere and environment.
Well, Prime Minister Mottley, as always, it's really inspirational to talk to you. I love many of the issues that you raised. I mean, this notion that we're, you know, how important it is for all of us to remember, you know, the younger generations and how they're going to be able to help us shape this post-COVID world, and at the same time, be able to do more in terms of climate change and adaptation and the way that we do works with cities, with natural capital, but more importantly, this holistic approach that you have. And I equally want to thank Juan Pablo, and at the same time, something you said that I think is so critical. Finally, people are listening to science. And I think this is something that is revealing to all. I think we're all learning, trying to go back to our biology class and try to understand many of the things that we hear today. And it's probably part of those lessons that come with COVID. So thank you very much, as always, Prime Minister, for your insights and your motivation. You leave us with a lot of thoughts, and thank you for being such a great partner and always pushing us to do more. That's the kind of challenges that we love to have. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Juan Pablo, and everyone else who's listening.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon.